David Brin here is a prolific science fiction author of over a dozen novels, many short stories, and a few graphic novels. One of his books, The Postman, was even turned into a movie starring Kevin Costner. David is also a futurist consultant for particular organizations, consulting a wide variety of groups ranging from Defense Department agencies to Google. That's quite a fascinating life you live, David.
Yeah, well, I guess it beats working for a living. I tried to escape from the family. I come from generations of writers, and I knew I would write, and I was arrogant enough to figure I would be successful at it. And it was my hobby, but I tried to escape from the arts into science because even though the arts propagandize that the arts are wonderful and magnificent and especially human and beautiful and rare, all of those things are true, except for the rare part. There has never been a human civilization that didn't fizz with art. And on the rare occasions when the society tried to repress the artists, well, actually, it wasn't that rare if you talk about the rambunctious, daring artists. They are often repressed. But on the occasions when art is repressed, you get a fizzing and a dynamic underground art scene, as we saw behind the Iron Curtain. So the arts are not rare. They fizz out of us. Most of the people listening to this right now have an artistic avocation of some sort, or at least something they love receiving, some kind of art they love to receive, like music. All the great scientists I've ever known had artistic hobbies or avocations, some of them that they pursued at a professional level. I mean, I'm told that I was 4 years old and I saw Einstein play the violin. Who knows? I don't remember.
Wow.
But I escaped into something that most societies did not have, and that is science. I looked around when I was 10 or 12, and I saw that people were doing stuff that had never been done before, and that it involved honesty. See, the arts aren't honest. Look at how the artists behave with each other. The arts are wonderful. They're magnificent, but they're delusional. They're all about delusion. And now that I am an artist, I create delusions, industrial-grade delusions, by creating chains of black squiggles across pages. Or you whippersnappers don't use pages anymore, I guess. But so believe me, I know the difference. And I went into science and I did all right. I did some good stuff. And as an engineer, I did some good stuff with Hughes Aircraft, or as we sometimes call it, Huge Air Crash. But the hobby took over. The art took over.
I see.
As I suspected it might.
But it's a nice blend of science and art.
Well, yeah. But the science, the science informs my art, and I think that's appropriate because science fiction is not about lightsabers and starships and zap zap. It is about dealing with how humans adapt to change. At least that's how science fiction should be at the high end. How we adapt to change, and change is the most pertinent, most relevant trait of our society. He says exactly 1 week after America changed.
Yes, it did, in fact.
Yeah. But we'll cope with change. And we live in a science fictional world now, so we'll adjust to living in a science fictional world.
Right. Speaking
and-
of
yeah.
science fiction, you're a hard science fiction author. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's sometimes one of the phrases is that this hard SF or hard science fiction is where the fiction, the The story, the plot, the gimmicks, they all make use of real science and try to be as consistent as possible. We have these little nubs above the eyes called the prefrontal lobes, and they're what enable us to do what Einstein called the Gedanken experiment. Gedanken experiment, or thought experiment in German, where we project a mental image of ourselves in another place and time. And we do all do this. We all do this. What would happen if I try to play this new number when I have the gig next week, Chris? What happens if I try to raise this idea at a meeting? What happens if I wear this outfit or try to run this yellow light? Taken to a more extreme, like Einstein, a thought experiment helped him to figure out relativity before he did the math. So in science fiction, we use these nubs above the eyes to project ourselves into another time and place and say, what if this trend were to continue? What if this scientific discovery turned into something big that either rocked our world or shook us up or threatened disaster? And that's what George Orwell did with the telescreen in 1984, where the hard science fiction projection of the use of video and cameras to control the population. And that was hard science fiction in that there was nothing fantastically unlikely in what he did, but in so doing, he created what I call the self-preventing prophecy. You've heard of the self-fulfilling prophecy, of course. Well, that's a prophecy that makes itself come true because it inspires people to try to make it come true, like the cell phones we saw in Star Trek.
Right.
People wanted them, so it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-preventing prophecy is one that scares people, millions of people, into fighting to prevent it from coming true. And the granddaddy of them all was George Orwell's 1984, which inspired hundreds of millions of people to fight against Big Brother. And a decent conservative is worried that Big Brother might come from government bureaucrats. A decent liberal is concerned that Big Brother may come from faceless corporations. But in fact, they're both right. And one of the tragedies of our era is that we're so busy screaming at each other that we don't notice this common thread, that we're all afraid of losing this glorious, experiment of ours. In any event, the self-preventing prophecy is what I tried to do with the postman by talking about how we might lose our sense of community as Americans, and selfishness, racism, hatred of our common project could erupt in a rebellion, basically, that destroys the United States of America. And people who want to make parallels with current events are welcome to try. I'm getting a lot of emails about the postman this last 6 months, especially the last 6 days. But we could talk about that as well.
I see. What, the Postman came out in '97? Is that right?
Yeah. Winter '97. Kevin Costner sent around an email, and yes, there were emails in the 20th century. He sent around an email saying, we've got it made, this Christmas release for our great new movie, The Postman. Our only competition is James Cameron's silly little remake about a sinking boat. So it was released. It was released the same weekend as Titanic. Needless to say, Costner's film was not the iceberg; it was the boat.
Oh, that's all right. But regardless, though, making a movie with Kevin Costner, that's pretty remarkable, coming from the span of, I mean, You must have just started. What was your first book?
Oh, that was Sundiver in 1980.
That's right. So
Yeah.
you went a long way. Um, did you start writing in college? And
Yeah.
what college did you go to?
Oh, well, I did my undergraduate. I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to the same high school, LA High School, as Ray Bradbury.
Oh, that's awesome.
Different class um, by 30 years. But I did my undergrad at Caltech in Pasadena, and I started poking at novels then because it was a very stressful place to do your undergrad, especially in the 1960s with all that incredible music coming out. Um, so I would distract myself by poking at some novels. And my sophomore year, my second attempt was something called The Practice Effect, and I later pulled it out and reworked it, and it became my second published novel. No, my third published novel, and it's lots of fun. Uh, and I occasionally like to do a really fun novel, one that makes people smile and laugh. The Practice Effect, Kiln People, Kiln, Kiln People. That's where you can make copies of yourself every day and download their memories at the end of the day. So that's a busy person's dream come true. You know, if you have twice as much things to do in any given day as there is time to do it, well, then you make a copy and everything gets done. If you have 4 times as much to do, you make 3 copies. And
That's
so
interesting.
yeah, well, it's loads of fun. You know, it's a detective story. It's a noir detective story set in a world where the detective can make many copies of himself, um, and desperately needs to. So yeah. So it's been fun. I haven't been writing as much lately. You know, 3 kids in college at the same time. I've been doing a lot of public speaking about the future. Just this last month, I spoke for IBM, GE, Viacom, and Boeing. Although
Wow.
that was a busier than average month, and it helped pay for 3 kids in college at the same time. So one of them is perpetually expensive. So next on your questions
Well,
list.
yes. I mean, speaking of college kids, the audience that's watching this is primarily college kids, and they're just trying to figure out what they're trying to do, and some of them are going to start businesses. How did your college experience contribute to your success as an author?
Well, my educational experience is highly unusual. You have people like Donald Trump who went to Silver Spoon youth academies and all the Ivy League schools and all of that, and that's considered to be the best education. No way. I got the best education. I went to an extremely difficult and rigorous technical school for my undergrad, and then I worked for a little while, got some experience in the world, and then went to grad school at UCSD. But the thing that made the biggest difference in my education was not the formal classes, which had to be grounded in science because that's the field in which you need the most discipline. You need classes for that. Other fields of human endeavor you can study on your own if you get the habit, if you can develop the curiosity to get off of the modern addictions of the video games and things like that, and to instead, for example, watch all the wonderful videos out there that teach you something. You come away from the same amount of time as you had one stint in a video game, you can come away knowing all about Korean history. Only the difference is that evening you spent, watching somebody's wonderful, lavish video about Korean history, you come away with something forever. Whereas the video game, and mind you, I do some video games, you come away with strong thumbs
There you go.
and a shorter temper. Does it sound like I'm yammering like an old fart? No, I'm going to give you guys a piece of advice, and that is those of you who transfer to a university, And I have a video about this online if you want to get yelled at again. If you go on to a university, because this is something you can only sort of marginally do at a community college, but you can do it at the community college. Don't just go from class to class. If you have a spare hour here or there and you're all cut up in your homework and you're studying, throw a dart at a map of the campus. Go to the nearest place where that dart landed on the map. Go stand outside that building and roll a dice to pick a random floor. Go to that floor and throw a ball down the hall. Pick up the ball and knock on the nearest door. So you've randomly chosen a room in a randomly chosen building in a randomly chosen floor. And knock on that door and say, what do you do here? I mean, when you're at a university in these random buildings that you've been ignoring, things are happening that are changing humanity. They're changing everything. And you're walking past them. And you're betraying your parents, you're betraying your civilization, you're betraying the money that you earned in your job to pay for this. You have the freedom to knock on these doors and ask, what do you do? What's happening in this room? And 9 times out of 10, you'll get an amazed person saying, oh, you're interested? Here, and you get an hour's free tour of something you had no idea was ever happening. I did that, and I got some friendships, and I got 3 different summer jobs. 3 different summer jobs.
Wow.
And I learned so much stuff. And what's the worst that can happen? Always ask yourself when somebody's given you a dare, what's the worst that can happen? You know, my not yet fiance told me that she wouldn't marry anybody who hadn't jumped out of an airplane at 10,000 feet.
What?
And I begged and I whined, and she said, all right, wimp, you can have a parachute. And because I jumped out of an airplane at 10,000 feet, my children exist. All right. In that case, I asked myself, what's the worst that can happen? And I had to seriously weigh how much I wanted her. But when you're knocking on a random door at a university saying, what do you do here? What's the worst that can happen? Go away. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's very true.
I'm so sorry that you had heard the words go away. Here's what you do. And then you go to the next door. Knock on 3 doors, you'll get that tour. See, but it's not so much that particular prescription. You know, half of your classmates will watch this, and they'll go to university and they'll think about doing it. And a quarter of those will do it. And they'll be enriched. No, the thing about this is, are you that kind of person? Are you the kind of person who develops curiosity when you're a citizen of a civilization that for the first time in human history rewards curiosity? That says, oh, you're interested? How about this? How about this? How about this? How about this? And if it's just the video games and Facebook and the porn sites and the whatever that you're doing with this magnificent tool, then you're turning your back on a free gift.
Right. That's a great piece of advice. I hope that that everyone watching does that to some extent. So we are a club for online business. In what ways do you use the internet and social media to try and sell your works, would you say?
Well, the arts have changed. It used to be that the arts were ferociously feudal, terribly filthy and unfair. extremely competitive. All this touchy-feely talk about the arts being, non-competitive and all that sort of thing is insane. There's nothing more competitive than the arts. For most of human history, we had pyramidal cultures with those at the top, the elites, dominating those below and cheating to make sure they would stay below. That's called feudalism. That's 99% of human cultures until our great experiment came along. And we hope that our great experiment survives, because we're the first to have a diamond-shaped social structure in which the well-off, skilled people outnumber the poor and are unafraid of the rich, and some of them churn and get up there to the rich. So it's a completely different society, and it's never been perfect. And there's always efforts to turn it back into a pyramid. Why did I give you that little rant about society and politics and all of that? Because that's what my field, the arts, is like. It's pyramidal. There are lords and kings and priests and all of that at the top. And it's always, it takes only 1/10 of the people at the next level. For every person who earns a good living, like I do, for every 10 of us, there's one Stephen King. For every 10 Stephen Kings, there's a J.K. Rowling. See, and we're all right. But for every one of me, there's 10 who merely earn a sort of a middle class, pay the rent income as artists, but they don't have to have a day job. For every one of them, there's 10 who have to have a day job, but are earning a nice little, they pay for a couch with their art. They pay for a car while they have their day job. And they, Sultans of Swing, they go out on Friday night, tearing it up Friday night.
That's right.
And for every one band like that, there's 10 that, are appreciated on amateur night. The point is that in order to go up and get up to a next level, in music there have always been two approaches. One is some lord can pluck you up, or you go up the ramp along the side of the pyramid. Amateur night, local stars, local album, front men for somebody bigger. So there's these two approaches. In publishing, and I eventually got around to my field, in publishing literature, it always was the first one. You had to be plucked up. So if your manuscript wasn't accepted by a publisher, you tried another, and then nobody would ever see your work until somebody wanted to bet the money of publishing and putting your book in the bookstores. That has changed. Now in writing, in publishing, the ramp is there, just like it was in music, because there's ways to have your amateur night. There's ways to have your local band, and that is self-publishing. You can self-publish online. You can post your story as a blog. You can go to these maybe a lot of people will read it, like 50 Shades of Grey, although I'm ashamed to be a member of a species in which that worked, but okay. So you see, now you can get plucked up, or you can have the ramp to go up the pyramid as a writer. The ramp didn't used to exist, but it always existed in music. So that's one parallel.
I see.
Now, I'm already up high enough that I'm in the professional category. When I create a book, it's going to be published, it's going to the bookstores. But I do have to not rely on my publisher to promote, because they're doing a lot less of it these days. And the bookstore is much, much less of what's going on. Far more is Amazon. Far more is people ordering directly from my site. And so I have to be out there. I have to do self-promotion. I have to send him announcements to my newsletters, to my email list. And yet I do it very little because it's dangerous. You don't want people to become resentful. You don't want them to resent your constant sales pitches.
So you're saying
I mentioned
there's a good balance?
Well, you have to find your balance, and it's going to depend upon what kind of stuff you create. If you're a business person who's going to be creating jewelry and selling it online, well, that's very different than if you're creating a business and online. And I know some people like that, where they make their living by selling subscriptions to their inner newsletter, where they give the real advice about what gospel, outer newsletter, and they don't tout the inner one that much, but they do at the end of every one of their outer newsletters, where they give it away for free, saying, pay to subscribe to my inner newsletter and you'll get the real advice. And so what we're talking about here is monetization, which you can monetize your product. Now, the classic method is to get your publisher to put it in the bookstore, or to get your product manufactured in the stores, the retail stores, and then you get a cut of that. If you're an inventor, you get a cut by licensing your patents. If you're a musician, you get a cut of every purchase of a CD or a record.
Right.
And supposedly you get a cut from every download, from those few people out there who actually download, through, and pay for their downloads. But you can see that the model is changing. One thing that's very, very concerning is that the internet for 30 years, and it's almost impossible to imagine, but more like 25 years, how it's possible. How could advertising be paying for this gigantic structure? This huge, huge melange of stuff. I don't get it. I don't see how it can work, and it certainly can't continue to work. So one of the things that I've published, and people can look it up online, is to discuss how we can monetize that. Another way that people try to monetize is they have paywalls. So the New York Times, you can read 10 articles for free per month, and if you want more, you must become a subscriber of the New York Times, and then you get to read all of their articles. Because journalism in America is being killed. It's being destroyed because the advertising has fled away from the main prestigious professional news sources like the New York Times to wild and crazy opinion websites. And this election is a huge reflection of that fact. So I have a paper that people can look up with my name and the word micropayments. And one way is that instead of creating a paywall of $20 a month and a password for the New York Times, instead, if there was a simple button on your browser that let you just click a nickel symbol with no password, then you'd be willing to go to the New York Times and read their articles at the source.
I see.
So the whole question of how you monetize has been a major perplexity across this entire era of the internet. And the problem appears now to have seriously bitten us, because we had these echo chambers in which people coalesced to hear only people like them and to listen to conspiracy theories instead of facts. And that's dangerous. That's, the war on science isn't just against science, it's against every single knowledge profession. I mean, you've heard it. It's teachers are the enemy, civil servants are the enemy, economists, journalists are the enemy. All the people who know stuff, and that's worrisome. And we've seen what happened.
Right. Well, it seems like we have time for maybe one more question. Um, so you're a futurist consultant, um, and you have a somewhat of a power of speculation, and because of that, what do you believe the future holds for the internet and its effect on startups, business, and the economy? Uh, yeah.
Well, this has we've been in a golden age of certain types of startups, and the internet empowered that. Lately, a lot, if your startup looks like it's got something going, what you do is you don't make it a product creating company. You wait till somebody offers a buyout. So this is how a lot of the big companies are doing their R&D. They farmed out their R&D and risk taking to small units, to small startups. This is especially true in the internet and the pharmacological industry, the drug industry. And so in-house research has declined in a lot of these places. And that's all right. You know, we're getting a lot of internet innovation, and we're getting a lot of pharmacological innovation. What's going to make a big difference in the future is local production. You've seen the maker movement with the little boxes that do 3D printing. Well, GE's got 3D printing so well sussed that they're making the blades for jet engines. So we're not talking little plastic gimcrackeries anymore, but you can create shapes out of metal, out of and yes, biological materials. They spray cells now in order to craft and make a new esophagus to be transplanted in a cancer patient.
Wow.
It's an amazing era, and it's an amazing era to be part of. And as usual, real bright cusses are going to make a mint off of this. And so what is the implication for the rest of us? Well, you know, we saw in this last election that there was a lot of resentment of globalization, even though globalization is the best thing that ever happened to this planet. The American peace, or Pax Americana, created a system in which people all over the world are doing so much better because we've been trading with each other. 3/4 of the world's children now come home to apartments. They bring school books home to apartments with electric lights that they can study by, and with a fridge and potable water. That's the threshold from which they can move on. So it's still poverty, but it's incredibly better than what their parents had. And globalization did that. NAFTA is making a middle-class Mexico next door, which is, we are doing that, and it's worth more than anything to have a middle-class Mexico next door. But I'm not here to defend globalization. The fact of the matter is globalization is going to end, and it's not because people voted for Donald Trump. Globalization is going to end because America is now energy independent for a while, and with the rapid increase in solar and wind and all of these sustainables and battery power, it looks like we're likely to stay energy independent, which means our industries can stay here. The advantage of cheap labor overseas is going away. Our mass production capabilities are reaching the point where we might as well have the robots here. And so these giant ships that are crossing the ocean right now into these giant harbors, they may not be doing that in 5 years or 10 years, because we're going to be able to make a lot of the things we want, if not with our home 3D printer than at a kiosk somewhere in our neighborhood where they have a more advanced 3D printer, and they're selling it next to the 7-Eleven. Maybe even 7-Eleven will have one. And you need a part for a machine, you go to your local 7-Eleven and they're more sophisticated, or you go farther to downtown and they make a special part for you. Food can be grown, some kinds of food, certainly lettuce, they've sussed that, vertically on the sides of buildings, just using the power of the sunlight hitting the building and recycling the water.
Hmm.
Um, what happens when we get tissue culture meat? When we can shave a few cells off of the best tasting cow and the best tasting chicken on the planet and just grow them, grow meat. If science fiction predicted this 50 years ago, but if we could do that, can you imagine the amount of the countryside we'd save? The amount of this earth, the amount of water, if it were tasty and efficient.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be
uh,
wonderful.
well, yeah, suddenly 20 years from now, people would be saying, oh, you mean you eat natural meat? You mean you kill? Uh, and I'm saying this as a carnivore, you know,
Right.
but I look forward to the day when that karma will be lifted off my shoulder, and notice that then your beef will be locally produced, your lettuce will be locally produced, a lot of the things you buy will be locally produced. In which case, will you need a car as much? In which case, your self-driving car might be shared with 3 neighbors, or you just simply call the robo Uber whenever you want to go anywhere. So I'm not saying that this world is necessarily coming, but what I'm saying is that if you want to be ready, you need to pay attention. You need to get off the video games and watch PBS shows about the future. But above all, you need to read science fiction.
There you go.
And there goes. And then now I've taught you something about sales pitches.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. Thank you so much for interviewing with us, David. Uh,
Uh,
I'm sure all the
ab-
students will appreciate the advice and fascinating ideas. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and I urge you all to have lively minds. Stay curious. For heaven's sake, why have it be beaten out of you? I mean, look around you. There are elements of society that are trying to beat the curiosity out of you. But look around you at the colleges and the PBS shows and all of that. There's other parts of society that are on your side. Find that inner 4-year-old.
Right.
That's how you're going to get rich.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks a lot, David.